"You are standing at the wrong gate," the head security guard said coldly, his hand resting on the metal barrier as the tall man in the faded jacket stepped closer to the entrance of the Ashford estate. The morning sun reflected off the iron gates like polished steel, casting long shadows across the gravel driveway that stretched nearly a quarter-mile toward the massive stone mansion in the distance. 2 black security vehicles were parked beside the guard station, their engines humming quietly in the crisp North Carolina air. The guards had been watching the man since his old dark blue sedan rolled up the winding road 10 minutes earlier. In this neighborhood, a car like that usually meant delivery driver, landscaper, or someone who had taken a wrong turn. It did not mean visitor, and it certainly did not mean someone who belonged beyond the gates of one of the wealthiest properties in the entire county. The man stepped out of the car slowly, tall and calm, his posture relaxed but deliberate, as if he had walked this path before. His name was Elias Brooks, and the first thing he noticed was not the guards, not the suspicious stares, but the security cameras mounted along the stone pillars. For cameras, all angled with military precision. He studied them for a second longer than most people would. The guard noticed. "Sir," the man said again, sharper this time, "deliveries go around the back service road." Elias looked at him quietly, then glanced past the gate toward the distant mansion where morning light poured across tall windows and white marble balconies. Somewhere beyond those walls a young boy was probably already awake, and somewhere inside the house someone was waiting. But the guards did not know that. To them, he was just another stranger at the wrong address. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. Elias rested one hand lightly on the top of the iron gate, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingers. The security guard stepped forward immediately. "Do not touch that." The second guard shifted his stance beside the patrol vehicle, arms crossed over his chest. Both men were trained to read body language, and the calm confidence of the man standing in front of them was beginning to irritate them more than anything else. Most people who arrived at the Ashford estate reacted the same way when they were turned away. They apologized quickly, climbed back into their cars, and drove off without another word. Elias Brooks did not move. Instead, he looked at the guard and spoke in a voice that was calm enough to make the silence around the gate feel even heavier. "I am expected." The head guard let out a short laugh that carried just enough sarcasm to make the second guard smile. "Sure you are," he said, shaking his head slowly. "Let me guess. You are here to see Mrs. Ashford personally." Elias did not answer immediately. His eyes drifted once more to the camera above the gate, then to the keypad mounted beside the guard station, then to the reinforced lock hidden inside the steel hinge system. Every detail exactly where he remembered it. The guard noticed that too. His smile faded slightly. "Look," the man said, his voice firm now, "this property is private. If you do not have an appointment, you need to leave." Elias reached slowly into the pocket of his jacket. The guard stiffened at once. One of them stepped forward. "Easy," the second guard muttered under his breath. But Elias did not pull out a weapon. He pulled out a phone. A simple black phone with a cracked corner on the case. The head guard rolled his eyes. "Calling someone will not help you," he said. "Nobody inside that house is expecting you." Elias unlocked the phone and stared at the screen for a moment, the reflection of the iron gate faint in the glass. The guards waited unimpressed. To them it looked like the man was finally giving up and calling a ride to leave. But Elias Brooks was not calling anyone. His thumb hovered over an application on the screen. Then he tapped it once. And somewhere deep inside the Ashford Estate Security Network, a system that had not been manually touched in nearly 2 years suddenly woke up. The iron gate did not open all at once. It moved slowly at first, the heavy steel hinges releasing a low mechanical hum that rolled through the quiet morning air like distant thunder. The 2 guards stared at it, as if the gate itself had suddenly decided to betray them. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the head guard, Ryan Holt, stepped forward sharply, his hand grabbing the edge of the control panel beside the booth. His eyes flicked between the moving gate and the man standing calmly in front of it. Elias Brooks had not taken a single step. He stood exactly where he had been moments earlier, phone still in his hand, his face calm as if nothing unusual had just happened. The gap between the gates widened another foot. Gravel shifted beneath the tires of the patrol vehicle as the second guard turned toward Ryan. "Did you open it?" the man asked quickly. Ryan did not answer. His fingers moved across the control pad, checking the status lights. The screen showed something that made his jaw tighten. Owner access mode. That setting could only be triggered from inside the security network itself. No delivery driver could activate it. No visitor could activate it. Only someone with administrative control could do that. Ryan lifted his head slowly and looked back at Elias. "Step away from the gate," he said, his voice suddenly sharper. Elias did not move. The iron gate continued sliding open behind him until the opening was wide enough for a vehicle to pass through. Beyond it, the long driveway curved through rows of tall oak trees that lined the property like silent guards of their own. Sunlight filtered through the leaves and spilled across the white stone walls of the Ashford mansion in the distance. Ryan took 2 steps closer to Elias now. "Who gave you access to this system?" he demanded. The second guard had already moved to the side of the patrol vehicle where a radio hung from the doorframe. His eyes had not left Elias for a second. The man standing in front of them did not look nervous. He did not look surprised. He simply slipped the phone back into his jacket pocket and glanced once more at the open gate. "Nobody gave it to me," Elias said quietly. Ryan frowned. "That is not possible." Elias looked at him again, and there was something in his expression that made Ryan feel an unfamiliar flicker of uncertainty. Not arrogance, not anger, just patience. "You should close the gate," Ryan said quickly, turning toward the control panel again. His fingers moved across the keypad. Nothing happened. The system screen still displayed the same message. "Owner access active." The second guard spoke into the radio now, his voice low but tense. "Control room confirm gate status." Static crackled for a moment before the voice of the inside technician responded. "Gate just switched to owner mode from remote authorization." Ryan felt his stomach tighten slightly. He looked up again. Elias Brooks was already walking forward. The gravel under his shoes crunched softly as he passed the guard station and stepped through the open gates like someone who had crossed that entrance many times before. Ryan moved in front of him quickly, blocking the driveway again. "You are not going anywhere," he said firmly. Elias stopped. They stood only a few feet apart now. Ryan could see the reflection of the tall, iron gates in Elias' eyes. Calm, observant, patient. "You think opening the gate gives you permission to walk in here?" Ryan asked. Elias tilted his head slightly toward the cameras mounted above the pillars. "You should really check your camera logs," he said. "They will tell you the same thing your control panel already did." Ryan felt irritation rising in his chest. "And what exactly is that supposed to mean?" Elias looked past him toward the distant mansion again, where sunlight was now glowing across the upper balcony windows. Somewhere inside that house a young boy was probably watching the driveway cameras already. "Waiting. It means," Elias said quietly, "that your system recognizes me." The second guard lowered the radio slowly. Ryan stared at Elias for a long moment. Then he asked the question that had been forming in his mind since the gate first began to move. "Who are you?" Elias Brooks looked back at the open driveway, stretching toward the Ashford mansion. Then he answered in the calmest voice either guard had heard all morning. "The person who built the system you're trying to use to keep me out." Ryan Holt did not blink for several seconds after hearing the words. The quiet morning air seemed to grow heavier around the entrance of the Ashford estate. The second guard lowered the radio completely now, his eyes shifting between Elias Brooks and the open gate behind him. The man standing in front of them did not look like someone who owned anything on this property. His jacket was worn at the cuffs. His sedan parked near the roadside had more than one scratch along the door. Panels. Nothing about him matched the polished world that existed beyond the iron gates. And yet the gate was open. Ryan folded his arms slowly, studying Elias more carefully now. "You expect me to believe that you built this system," he said. Elias did not answer immediately. Instead, he glanced once more toward the tall stone pillars where the cameras were mounted. The cameras were small, matte black, barely noticeable against the pale granite. But Elias knew every angle, every lens, every blind spot that did not exist. His eyes followed the thin cable lines that disappeared into the security conduit running beneath the guard station floor. He had spent months designing that network. Long nights inside server rooms. Endless conversations about fail-safe protocols. Quiet arguments about encryption layers that nobody else inside the Ashford organization fully understood. The second guard spoke softly, almost to himself. The technician said owner mode. Ryan shot him a quick look, but said nothing. His attention was still locked on Elias. If you built it, Ryan continued, then you should know how serious this situation is. This is private property. We do not allow strangers to walk in here, claiming they wrote the code. Elias nodded once. That makes sense. Ryan was not expecting that answer. It made him hesitate for a moment. But the system is telling you something else, Elias added quietly. Ryan stepped closer again. Systems can be hacked. Elias almost smiled, but the expression faded before it fully appeared. Not this one. The statement was calm. Certain. Ryan noticed that certainty immediately. It did not sound like arrogance. It sounded like someone describing gravity or sunlight. Something simple. Something obvious. Behind them, the open gate stood silent now, the steel panels resting against the stone walls like they had always belonged there. The driveway stretched toward the distant mansion where the morning light was beginning to brighten the wide balconies and tall windows. Somewhere beyond those windows, a small figure stood in front of a wall-mounted screen. Inside the Ashford security control room, a young technician leaned closer to the monitor display. He had been reviewing system logs ever since the gate shifted into owner mode. The access code did not appear in the employee database. It did not appear in the resident database either. Instead, the authorization field displayed a different label. Original architect override. The technician frowned and leaned closer to the screen. He had never seen that designation before. Back at the gate, Ryan exhaled slowly and shook his head. Even if what you're saying is true, he said, we still have procedures. Nobody enters the Ashford estate without confirmation. Elias looked at him calmly. You already have confirmation. Ryan opened his mouth to respond, but stopped when the radio in the second guard hand suddenly crackled to life. The technician voice came through the speaker with a tone that carried both confusion and curiosity. Gate station, do you have a man at the entrance named Elias Brooks? Ryan stared at Elias for a moment before answering. Yes. There was a short pause on the radio. Then the technician spoke again. You might want to let him in. Ryan frowned. Why? The technician hesitated. Because according to the system records, he said slowly, the entire security network running this property was built under his authorization credentials. Ryan felt the ground beneath his confidence shift slightly. He looked back at Elias Brooks, the man he had been trying to push away from the gate only minutes earlier. Elias was already turning his attention back toward the driveway leading to the mansion. Calm, patient, like someone who knew that sooner or later the system would speak for him. Elias Brooks did not hurry. After the voice on the radio finished speaking, the space around the gate fell into a strange silence that neither Ryan Holt nor the second guard seemed ready to fill. Ryan still stood in the middle of the driveway, his body blocking the path even though the gate behind Elias was now fully open. Gravel shifted softly under Ryan's boots as he adjusted his stance, the tension in his shoulders tightening in a way that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with uncertainty. The second guard looked from Elias to Ryan and then back toward the radio in his hand, as if waiting for someone else to correct what they had just heard. The technician voice had been clear. The system records belonged to Elias Brooks. But the man standing at the gate did not look like the architect of a multi-million-dollar security network. Ryan spoke first, though his tone was noticeably less certain than before. The technician might have the wrong file, he said. Elias did not respond. Ryan continued, more firmly now, as if convincing himself as much as anyone else. A lot of people work on projects like this. Contractors, programmers, subcontractors. That does not mean you have authorization to walk into this property. Elias watched him quietly. His calm expression had not changed since the gate first opened. The morning air carried the distant sound of wind moving through the tall oak trees lining the long driveway. Beyond them, the Ashford mansion rose in pale stone and glass, the upper windows now glowing brighter under the rising sun. Elias had stood on that balcony once during construction, months before the estate had been finished. Back then, the place had been nothing but scaffolding, electrical wiring, and exposed network conduits waiting to be sealed behind marble walls. He remembered the first time the system came online. The gates opening, the cameras activating, the encrypted network humming through every corridor of the house like a nervous system inside a living body. Ryan was still watching him carefully. "Why are you here?" Ryan asked at last. Elias glanced past him toward the mansion again. "I was invited." Ryan frowned. "By who?" Elias hesitated for a moment, then answered simply, "Victoria Ashford." The name changed the air between them in a way that even the second guard could feel. Ryan's expression hardened again. "Mrs. Ashford does not schedule visitors through the gate," he said. "Everything goes through the office." Elias nodded slowly. "Usually," Ryan exhaled sharply. "Look, I do not know what game you are playing, but I am not letting anyone walk up that driveway based on a story and a phone application." Elias slipped his hands into the pockets of his jacket and looked once more at the camera above the pillar. Somewhere inside the mansion, another screen was already displaying the same view. In a quiet room on the second floor, a young boy stood in front of that screen, his eyes fixed on the image of the gate. Oliver Ashford had been watching the security cameras every morning since the system had been installed. The cameras made him feel safe. Predictable patterns. Controlled spaces. No surprises. But this morning the pattern had changed. The boy recognized the man standing outside the gate almost instantly. Even after 2 years, the memory had not faded. Oliver turned from the screen and ran down the hallway, toward the staircase, his footsteps echoing softly against the marble floor. Back at the gate, Ryan lifted the radio again. "Control room confirmed visitor authorization for Mrs. Ashford," he said. Static filled the air for several seconds. The technician voice answered again, but this time it carried a trace of uncertainty. "There is no scheduled appointment listed." Ryan lowered the radio slowly and looked back at Elias with a small nod that carried a quiet finality. "Then you're not going inside." Elias did not argue. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he looked toward the mansion one more time, as if waiting for something that had not happened yet. The guards followed his gaze, but saw nothing moving along the distant driveway. For a moment, it seemed like the entire estate had fallen into stillness again. Then from somewhere beyond the trees, a small figure appeared, running down the front steps of the Ashford mansion. The small figure running down the steps of the Ashford mansion moved faster than anyone at the gate expected. At first, Ryan Holt thought it was one of the house staff rushing outside for some reason, but within seconds he realized it was a child. The boy sprinted across the wide stone courtyard with surprising determination, his dark sweater flapping slightly in the morning breeze as he ran down the long driveway path. The distance from the mansion to the gate was nearly 300 yards, and the path curved through rows of oak trees before reaching the entrance. Yet the boy kept running without slowing down. Ryan turned slightly toward the second guard. "Who is that?" he asked. The second guard squinted down the driveway, then straightened suddenly. "That is Oliver," he said quietly. Ryan looked again. Oliver Ashford rarely came near the gate. In fact, most of the staff knew that the boy preferred quiet rooms and predictable routines inside the mansion. Sudden changes made him uncomfortable. Loud noises made him withdraw. But now the boy was running straight toward them, his eyes fixed on the entrance like he had seen something he recognized. Elias Brooks noticed him immediately. The moment the child appeared between the tall oak trees, Elias' expression softened slightly, though he said nothing. Ryan crossed his arms again, still standing in the driveway. "Even if that is Oliver," he said firmly, "this does not change anything." The boy continued running, closing the distance with quick, determined steps until he reached the final stretch of gravel near the gate. His breathing was slightly uneven from the run, but his eyes remained locked on Elias. When he finally reached the entrance, he stopped just a few feet away, looking up at the man standing calmly beside the open gate. For several seconds, the guards waited for the boy to say something. Oliver did not speak right away. Instead, he studied Elias' face with the careful focus of someone searching through an old memory. Elias waited quietly. Then the boy finally said 2 words in a soft voice that carried clearly through the morning air. "You came." Ryan blinked in surprise. The second guard looked back and forth between them. Oliver stepped closer to Elias now, his expression no longer uncertain. "You built the cameras," the boy continued. "You said they would help me see everything." Elias nodded gently. "I remember." Ryan frowned. "Oliver," he said cautiously, "you should go back inside." But the boy did not move. Instead, he looked up at the guard as if the suggestion made no sense. "He is not a stranger," Oliver said quietly. Ryan felt a sudden shift in the situation that he had not expected. "Oliver," he repeated more carefully now, "do you know this man?" The boy nodded without hesitation. "He made the system for the house," Oliver said. "Mother said he was the only person who could make it safe." The second guard slowly lowered his arms. Ryan looked at Elias again, his earlier confidence slipping further with each passing second. Oliver turned back toward the open gate and then toward the long driveway leading to the mansion. "Mother is waiting," the boy said simply. Ryan stared at him. "Mrs. Ashford is expecting him." Oliver nodded again. The quiet certainty in the boy's voice carried a weight that neither guard could easily dismiss. For a long moment, Ryan Holt said nothing at all. He looked from Oliver to Elias Brooks, then back toward the mansion where the tall windows reflected the growing morning light. The man he had tried to send away was now standing beside the one person on the estate who rarely trusted anyone. And the boy clearly trusted him. Ryan stepped slowly out of the center of the driveway. The gravel shifted under his boots as he moved aside, leaving the path open. Elias Brooks looked down at Oliver for a brief moment before beginning to walk through the gate toward the mansion. The boy turned and walked beside him as if the two of them had done it many times before. Behind them, Ryan Holt watched in silence, realizing that the man he had just tried to block from the Ashford estate had never needed permission to enter in the first place. The gravel driveway stretched ahead like a quiet river of gray stone, curving gently through tall oak trees that had probably stood on the Ashford property for more than a century. Elias Brooks walked beside Oliver Ashford at an easy pace, neither of them rushing even though the mansion waited nearly 300 yards ahead. Behind them, the iron gates slowly closed again with a low mechanical sound that echoed faintly through the trees. Ryan Holt remained near the guard station, watching the two figures disappear down the driveway, his arms folded tightly across his chest. The second guard stood beside him in silence. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. It was the second guard who finally broke the quiet. "You think Mrs. Ashford really invited him?" he asked. Ryan did not answer immediately. His eyes were still fixed on the man and the boy walking side by side beneath the tall trees. "If the kid trusts him," the second guard continued carefully, "maybe we should have listened sooner." Ryan exhaled slowly, but said nothing. Farther down the driveway, Oliver walked with his hands slightly tucked into the sleeves of his sweater, occasionally glancing up at Elias, as if confirming that he was still there. For a child who normally avoided long conversations, the boy seemed unusually comfortable. "You changed the cameras," Oliver said after several steps. Elias nodded. "I made them faster." Oliver looked thoughtful for a moment. "They used to freeze sometimes when the weather was bad." Elias smiled slightly. "That should not happen anymore." The boy seemed satisfied with that answer. For Oliver Ashford, the house security system was more than technology. It was part of the pattern that made the world around him understandable. Cameras, sensors, quiet screens that showed him exactly what was happening beyond the walls of the mansion. 2 years earlier, the system had helped him sleep through the night for the first time in months. Elias remembered that moment clearly. Back then, the Ashford estate had been filled with contractors and engineers installing marble floors and glass railings. Oliver had rarely come outside during construction, but the day the security network came online, the boy had appeared quietly in the control room doorway. He had studied the monitors with intense concentration before asking a single question. "Can it see everything?" Elias had answered honestly. "Almost everything." The boy had nodded slowly, as if that answer made perfect sense. Now Oliver glanced back toward the gates where the guard station had almost disappeared behind the trees. "They did not believe you," the boy said calmly. Elias shrugged lightly. "That happens sometimes." Oliver looked forward again. "Mother said people judge before they understand." Elias did not respond immediately. The gravel path curved again, bringing the mansion fully into view. The Ashford estate was even larger up close than it appeared from the road. Tall white stone columns framed the main entrance. Wide glass windows reflected the bright morning sky. Two curved staircases rose toward the front terrace, where a single figure now stood watching the driveway. Victoria Ashford had been standing there since the moment Oliver left the house. She rested one hand lightly on the stone railing as Elias and her son approached. Even from a distance, Elias could see that she had not changed much in the past 2 years. Her posture remained calm and composed, the quiet authority of someone used to running companies and managing decisions that affected thousands of people. Oliver noticed her immediately. "Mother is waiting," he said. Elias nodded once. They continued walking until the wide stone steps of the mansion rose in front of them. Oliver climbed the first few steps quickly, stopping halfway to look back at Elias, as if making sure he would follow. Elias stepped onto the terrace a moment later. Victoria Ashford studied him carefully for several seconds before speaking. "I was beginning to wonder if the gate would keep you out," she said with a faint smile. Elias glanced back toward the long driveway where the iron gates stood far in the distance between the trees. "They tried," he replied quietly. Victoria Ashford nodded once, as if the answer confirmed something she had already expected. Then she stepped aside from the entrance and gestured toward the open doors of the mansion. "Come inside," she said. "There is something I need your help with again." The tall double doors of the Ashford mansion closed softly behind Elias Brooks, sealing the quiet morning air outside and replacing it with the still, cool calm of polished marble and filtered sunlight. The entrance hall stretched wide and high above him, with a ceiling that rose nearly 30 feet overhead. Sunlight poured through the tall glass panels along the east wall, scattering reflections across the pale stone floor. The space was silent except for the faint echo of footsteps as Oliver Ashford walked ahead toward the central staircase. Elias followed a few steps behind, while Victoria Ashford remained near the doorway, watching him with the careful expression of someone measuring more than just a visitor. After a moment, she turned and walked deeper into the hall. "You found the place easily," she said. Elias looked around the room slowly. The architecture had not changed since the day construction finished, but the space felt quieter now, more settled. "I remember where everything is," he replied calmly. Victoria nodded, once as if that answer had been expected. Oliver had already moved toward the wall of security monitors mounted beside a glass office door. The screens displayed views of the entire property: the iron gate, the driveway, the tree line along the western fence. The boy stood in front of the screens, studying them with the same intense focus he had shown years earlier. Elias noticed the subtle change immediately. 2 of the camera feeds were flickering slightly, not enough for most people to notice, but enough to catch the attention of someone who had built the system himself. Victoria followed his gaze. "You see it already," she said quietly. Elias nodded. "The signal buffer is failing." Victoria crossed her arms gently. "That is why I asked you to come." Elias stepped closer to the monitors, watching the screen where the image of the west fence line briefly shimmered before stabilizing again. "When did it start?" he asked. 2 weeks ago, she answered. Oliver glanced back toward them. "The camera freezes sometimes," the boy said softly. Elias nodded reassuringly. "I noticed." Victoria walked toward the glass office door and opened it. Inside the room, several servers hummed quietly behind a wall of protective panels. The Ashford security network had been designed to run almost entirely automated, but like any complex system, it required occasional human attention. Elias stepped inside the room and studied the central console, where system diagnostics glowed faintly across a screen. Victoria leaned lightly against the door frame. "My technicians try to fix it," she said. They replaced 2 network switches and updated the operating software. Nothing changed. Elias scanned the data quickly. Lines of code moved across the display as he checked the system status logs. The failure was subtle but obvious to him. They updated the wrong protocol layer, he said. Victoria raised an eyebrow slightly. Meaning? Elias looked back at the monitor feeds outside the office window where Oliver continued watching the screens. Meaning the system is still trying to communicate through the old encryption pathway I installed 2 years ago. Victoria studied him carefully. And only you know how that works. Elias did not answer directly. Instead, he turned back toward the console and entered a short command string into the interface. On the security wall outside the office, the camera feeds flickered once and then stabilized into perfect clarity. Oliver noticed immediately. It stopped freezing, the boy said quietly. Victoria stepped into the office now, her expression thoughtful rather than surprised. You always did understand the system better than anyone else, she said. Elias leaned back slightly from the console. Because I designed it around the way Oliver sees the world. Victoria looked toward her son again. For a moment, the powerful businesswoman who controlled several global companies looked less like an executive and more like a mother, simply watching her child feel safe. Oliver remained in front of the monitors, calm and focused. After a few seconds, Victoria turned back to Elias. I also asked you here for another reason, she said quietly. Elias looked up from the console. Victoria Ashford paused briefly before continuing. Something in the system has been trying to override your security protocols. Victoria Ashford words settled into the quiet server room like a stone dropped into still water. Elias Brooks did not respond immediately. Instead, he turned slowly back toward the central console and studied the security logs moving across the screen. The system diagnostics showed a pattern that most technicians would never notice. Tiny interruptions. Short bursts of authentication attempts that lasted less than half a second each. To someone unfamiliar with the architecture, it would look like harmless background noise. To Elias, it looked very different. It looked deliberate. When did this start? He asked calmly. Victoria remained near the door frame with her arms folded lightly. About 10 days ago, she answered. At first it only appeared once or twice a day. Now it happens every few minutes. Elias scrolled through the log records carefully. Each entry showed the same pattern. Attempted override. Failed authentication. Silent rejection. His system had been designed to quietly deny unauthorized access without triggering alarms that might expose the defense structure to whoever was testing it. Who else has administrative access? He asked. Victoria shook her head slightly. Only my internal technology team. Elias paused for a moment before speaking again. And me? Victoria Nadif. Exactly. Outside the office, Oliver Ashford was still watching the security monitors. The screens displayed the driveway, the front lawn, the stone walls along the property line. Everything looked calm, orderly, predictable, but the small flickers that had appeared earlier were now gone. Elias Repair had stabilized the network traffic immediately. Oliver seemed noticeably more relaxed now that the images no longer froze. The boy glanced back toward the office where Elias and his mother were speaking. Is something wrong? Oliver asked quietly. Victoria softened her voice. No, Oliver. Mr. Brooks is just checking the system. The boy nodded and turned back toward the screens again. Inside the office, Elias continued examining the log data. Whoever is trying this is careful, he said. Victoria watched him closely. Careful how? Elias pointed to a section of the diagnostic record. They are not attacking the system directly. They are testing its reactions. Victoria's expression grew more serious. Meaning, Elias leaned slightly closer to the screen. Meaning they are learning how the security network behaves. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The quiet hum of the servers filled the small room while the lines of system data continued scrolling across the display. Finally, Victoria asked the question that had clearly been forming in her mind since the problem first appeared. Can they get in? Elias shook his head slowly. Not yet. Victoria noticed the last 2 words immediately. But eventually, Elias did not try to soften the answer. Eventually, someone who studies the system long enough might discover a weakness. Victoria walked a few steps farther into the room now, her voice steady but serious. This house has more than just security cameras connected to that network. Elias nodded. I know. The Ashford estate used the same encrypted network for multiple systems. Gate control, perimeter sensors, internal alarms, even a quiet alert system that helped Oliver feel safe during the night. Elias had built the entire architecture around the boy needs. Any breach would not just threaten property. It would disrupt the stability Oliver depended on every day. Elias closed the diagnostic window and opened a deeper system layer that only one person had ever used before. I'm going to check something, he said quietly. Victoria watched the screen as new command lines appeared. The security logs shifted again, revealing hidden data fields buried beneath the visible network traffic. Elias' eyes narrowed slightly as he studied the information. Victoria noticed the change immediately. You found something? Elias did not answer right away. He traced the path of one particular authentication attempt through the encrypted pathways of the network. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable. The override attempts were not coming from outside the property. They were coming from somewhere inside the estate itself. Elias slowly leaned back from the console. Victoria's voice dropped to a whisper. Where is it coming from? Elias looked toward the wall of monitors where Oliver stood watching the cameras. Then he turned back to Victoria Ashford with a calm but unmistakably serious expression. From inside your house. Victoria Ashford did not move for several seconds after hearing the words. The quiet hum of the server racks seemed suddenly louder inside the small security room. Outside the glass wall, Oliver Ashford was still watching the monitors with calm concentration, unaware that the conversation behind him had shifted into something far more serious. Victoria lowered her voice instinctively. Inside the house, she repeated slowly. Elias Brooks nodded once. His eyes remained on the console where the deeper system map now displayed a faint pattern of activity moving through the internal network nodes. The Ashford security system was designed like a living map of the estate. Every corridor sensor, every exterior camera, every gate control panel appeared as a small glowing marker connected through encrypted pathways. Most of the nodes were quiet, stable, but one of them flickered faintly every few minutes. Elias pointed to the screen. There. Victoria leaned closer to look. The location marker pulsed softly on the digital floor plan of the mansion. Second floor west wing. Her eyes narrowed. Slightly. That section is staff housing and the secondary office suites. Elias traced the network route backward through the encrypted channels. The override attempts were not random. Each one followed the same careful path through the system architecture, touching several harmless subsystems before quietly testing the security core. Whoever was doing it knew enough about networks to hide their movements. But they did not know the deeper logic Elias had written into the system 2 years earlier. The system remembered patterns. They are studying the security behavior, Elias said quietly. Just like I told you before. Victoria straightened slightly, her expression thoughtful rather than frightened. She had built international companies from nothing and navigated business wars far more dangerous than a computer intrusion. But this was different. This was inside her home. Can you trace the exact room? She asked. Elias entered another short command line, and the map zoomed closer into the second floor layout. Individual rooms appeared now. Bedrooms, offices, storage areas. The signal blinked again. This time the system locked the location more precisely. Elias read the identifier on screen. West Wing Office 3. Victoria frowned slightly. That office has not been used in months. Elias studied the network signal again. Someone is using it now. Outside the office, Oliver turned his head slightly toward them, as if sensing the shift in tension, even though he could not hear their exact words. The boy walked slowly toward the doorway and stopped beside the glass wall. Is the system broken again? He asked softly. Victoria quickly softened her tone. No, Oliver. Mr. Brooks is just making it stronger. The boy nodded once and returned to the monitors. Elias watched him for a moment before turning back to the console. I need to see that room, he said quietly. Victoria hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Come with me." They stepped out of the security office and into the wide hallway beyond. The marble floor reflected the light from the tall windows along the eastern wall as they walked toward the staircase leading to the second floor. The mansion felt unusually quiet. Most of the staff had not yet begun their morning routines. Their footsteps echoed softly as they climbed the curved staircase. Halfway up the steps, Victoria slowed slightly. "If someone is trying to breach the system," she said quietly, "it means they already have access to the internal network." Elias nodded, "which means they are either staff or someone pretending to be." They reached the second floor landing where a long corridor stretched toward the west wing. The door to Office 3 stood halfway down the hall. From the outside, it looked completely ordinary. Closed. Silent. Elias noticed one detail immediately. A thin line of light glowed beneath the bottom of the door. Someone was inside. Victoria stopped a few steps away from it. That office should be empty. Elias studied the door carefully. Behind it, he could hear the faint sound of a computer cooling fan running quietly. Whoever was inside was still working. Elias glanced briefly back toward the staircase. Then he stepped forward and reached for the door handle. The moment his hand touched the metal knob, the computer fan inside the room suddenly stopped. The moment Elias Brooks touched the metal handle, the faint hum from inside the office disappeared completely. The silence that followed felt heavy in the long hallway of the West Wing. Victoria Ashford noticed it immediately. A computer cooling fan does not simply stop the instant someone touches a door, unless someone inside has just shut the system down. Elias turned the handle slowly and pushed the door open. The office lights were already on. A single desk lamp cast a narrow circle of yellow light across a polished wooden desk near the center of the room. The computer monitor sitting on the desk was dark now, but the faint warmth still rising from the machine told Elias it had been active only seconds earlier. The chair behind the desk was empty. Victoria stepped inside cautiously, her eyes moving across the room with the calm focus of someone who had spent years reading people and situations before they revealed themselves. "Someone was here," she said quietly. Elias nodded. The office window along the far wall stood partially open. A soft breeze moved the curtains slightly, allowing cool morning air to drift into the room. Elias walked toward the desk and placed his hand near the keyboard. The keys were still warm. Whoever had been using the computer had left only moments before they entered the hallway. Victoria crossed her arms slowly. "There is no balcony outside that window," she said. Elias looked toward the opening. The second floor window faced the interior courtyard of the mansion where the stone walls dropped nearly 20 feet to the garden below. No one could have climbed down quickly without making noise, which meant only one thing. The person had not escaped through the window. They had walked out through the hallway before Elias and Victoria reached the door. Elias turned back toward the computer and pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life. For a moment, only the system logo appeared. Then the desktop loaded. Victoria leaned slightly closer. Several windows had been closed in a hurry, but one diagnostic panel was still visible in the background. Elias recognized the software immediately. It was a network monitoring tool designed to analyze encrypted security systems. The person inside the room had been watching the Ashford network in real time. Elias opened the system history and began scrolling through the recent activity. Lines of code appeared across the screen showing authentication attempts, network scans, and encrypted packet analysis. Victoria watched his expression carefully. "Is that the override activity?" she asked. Elias nodded. "Yes." He paused for a moment while reading a sequence of command entries. They were getting closer. Victoria studied the screen as if trying to understand what the symbols meant. Closer to what? Elias looked up slowly. Closer to bypassing the outer security layer. Victoria was silent for a moment. That layer protected every critical system on the property. Gates, cameras, perimeter alarms, even a quiet alert system connected to Oliver Room upstairs. Elias continued scrolling through the log records. Whoever had been working here was skilled. The commands were precise, efficient, not the work of a casual intruder. Then Elias noticed something that made him pause. A single login credential appeared near the bottom of the activity list. Unlike the other hidden override attempts, this entry carried an internal user identification tag. Elias read the name quietly. Daniel Mercer. Victoria frowned slightly. He is one of our technology consultants. Elias nodded slowly, which means he has authorized access to the internal network. Victoria's voice hardened just a little, but not to the security core. Elias closed the diagnostic window and leaned back from the desk. Apparently, he has been trying to change that. The hallway outside the office remained silent. Whoever had been using this computer had vanished before they arrived. Victoria walked toward the doorway and looked down the empty corridor of the West Wing. Every door along the hallway remained closed. Nothing moved. Nothing looked disturbed. But the calm feeling inside the mansion had changed. Elias turned the monitor slightly so Victoria could see the final command line left on the screen. It was the last thing Daniel Mercer attempted before shutting down the system and leaving the room. Victoria read the line slowly. Then she looked back at Elias with a serious expression. He was trying to rewrite your access permissions. Elias nodded once. The calm certainty in his voice returned when he spoke again, which means he was not just studying the system. Victoria crossed her arms and looked once more down the silent hallway. He was trying to take control of it. Victoria Ashford remained standing in the doorway of the West Wing office while Elias Brooks quietly shut down the monitoring program on the computer. The glow of the desk lamp cast long shadows across the polished floor as the system screen returned to a blank desktop. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The realization that someone inside the Ashford organization had been trying to seize control of the estate security network hung in the air like a storm that had not yet broken. Finally, Victoria turned toward the hallway again. Daniel Mercer, she said slowly, as if repeating the name helped her place the pieces together. He has been working with our technology consultants for almost a year. Elias stepped away from the desk and joined her at the doorway. The West Wing corridor remained empty and quiet, but the silence now felt different. It was the kind of quiet that suggested someone had just passed through moments earlier. He must have seen the system log alert, Elias said calmly. When I accessed the deeper network layer, it would have triggered a silent notification to anyone monitoring the internal traffic. Victoria nodded once. So he knew you were coming. Elias glanced back at the still glowing computer screen. He knew someone was coming. They walked out into the hallway together. The door to Office 3 remained open behind them, the faint light from the desk lamp spilling across the corridor floor. Victoria began walking slowly toward the central staircase. Elias followed beside her, his eyes moving carefully along the length of the hall. If Mercer has been testing the system for days, Victoria said quietly, he must have been planning something. Elias nodded. Yes. Victoria stopped walking halfway down the corridor. What kind of control would he gain if he succeeded? Elias answered without hesitation. Complete control. Victoria looked at him sharply. You mean the gates? Elias shook his head slightly. Everything. The word hung in the quiet air between them. The Ashford Estate security system was not just a camera network. It was the central nervous system of the entire property. The gates, the alarm systems, the perimeter sensors, even the automated safety alerts designed to monitor Oliver Ashford environment at night. Whoever controlled that system would effectively control the entire estate. Victoria resumed walking toward the staircase again, her pace slightly faster now. Then we find Mercer, she said. They descended the curved staircase into the main entrance hall where the tall windows continued to pour bright morning light across the marble floor. Oliver Ashford was still standing in front of the security monitors, exactly where Elias had last seen him. The boy turned as they entered the room. The cameras changed again, Oliver said quietly. Elias walked toward the screens and studied them for a moment. The system map displayed across the largest monitor had shifted slightly. One of the network nodes that had been active earlier was now dark. Elias recognized the pattern immediately. Mercer shut down the access terminal in the West Wing office, he said. Victoria crossed her arms as she studied the screen, meaning he moved somewhere else. Elias nodded. Oliver watched the glowing system map carefully. The red that moved, the boy said softly. Elias looked closer at the display. Oliver was right. The internal network trace that had originated from Office 3 had relocated to another part of the system map. A different node was now flickering faintly. Elias traced the signal location with his finger across the screen. Ground level, he said quietly. Victoria leaned closer. Where? Elias followed the path to the final identifier on the display. The new location appeared beneath the security map in small white letters. Maintenance server room. Victoria's expression hardened immediately. That room connects directly to the central network core. Elias nodded once. Exactly. Oliver looked up at them both. Is someone trying to break the system? Elias knelt slightly, so he was at the boy eye level. Someone is trying to change it, he said calmly. Oliver thought about that for a moment. Then he looked back at the monitors again. You will stop them. Elias stood again and turned toward Victoria Ashford. The calm certainty had returned to his voice when he spoke. Yes, he said quietly. Then he began walking toward the hallway that led to the lower level of the mansion where the central server room waited. The hallway leading to the lower level of the Ashford mansion was quieter than the rest of the house, as if the building itself understood that something important was about to happen beneath its foundations. Elias Brooks walked first, his pace steady but purposeful as he followed the familiar path toward the central maintenance level. Victoria Ashford moved beside him, her posture calm yet alert, while the distant glow from the entrance hall slowly faded behind them. The staircase to the lower level curved downward through thick stone walls designed to keep the server rooms cool and protected from the rest of the estate. As they descended, the faint hum of electrical equipment became audible, a low, steady vibration that filled the corridor like the heartbeat of the entire security network. At the bottom of the stairs, a reinforced door stood at the end of a short hallway. The words Maintenance Server Control were printed clearly beside the keypad. Elias slowed slightly as they approached. The keypad screen was glowing, which meant someone had accessed the room recently. Victoria noticed it immediately. He is still inside, she said quietly. Elias nodded once. He stepped closer to the door and listened for a moment. The sound of multiple cooling fans could be heard inside, louder than the small office computer they had discovered earlier. Whoever had moved down here had access to the central hardware that powered the entire Ashford network. Victoria crossed her arms slowly. If Mercer finishes rewriting your access layer, he will control everything connected to this system. Elias placed one hand on the keypad panel. He is trying, he said calmly. Then he entered a short authorization sequence that bypassed the door lock. The security code had not been changed yet. The door clicked softly and opened. The room beyond was filled with tall racks of servers, blinking indicator lights, and the constant hum of cooling systems pushing air through the equipment. At the far end of the room, a man stood in front of the central console, typing rapidly. Into a terminal screen. Daniel Mercer turned the moment the door opened. For a second, his expression showed genuine surprise. Then the surprise faded into something colder. I wondered how long it would take you to find me, Mercer said. Elias stepped into the room, while Victoria remained near the doorway, watching carefully. Mercer glanced at the screen beside him, where lines of system code continued scrolling downward. You should have stayed away, Mercer added. Elias' voice remained calm. You should not have touched the system. Mercer gave a quiet laugh that carried no humor. You built an impressive network, he said, but you left something valuable behind. Elias looked briefly at the console display. Mercer had indeed reached the deeper security layer, but the final authorization command had not been executed yet. The system still recognized Elias as the primary architect. Mercer continued speaking as he typed. Do you know what a system like this is worth to the right people? He said. Complete access to a property like this means control over security contracts, corporate networks, private information. One successful breach, and I would never need another job again. Victoria stepped forward slightly. You were hired to protect this estate, she said firmly. Mercer shrugged without looking at her. People change careers. Elias studied the command sequence Mercer was preparing. It was clever but incomplete. Mercer had learned the structure of the system. He had not learned its hidden safeguards. "You will not succeed," Elias said quietly. Mercer finally looked directly at him again. "You think I have not prepared for that?" He pressed the final command key on the console. The screen flashed as the system attempted to overwrite the architect authorization layer. For a moment, the server room lights flickered softly as the network processed the command. Mercer smiled slightly. Then the screen froze. The system rejected the request instantly. Mercer frowned and typed again, but the console displayed the same message each time. "Access denied." Elias walked slowly toward the central terminal. "You study the system," he said calmly, "but you never understood it." Mercer looked up sharply. Elias reached the keyboard and entered a single line of code that Mercer had never seen before. The system map instantly reset the security core and restored the original encrypted permissions. Every command Mercer had attempted disappeared from the network history. The servers stabilized again. Mercer stared at the screen in disbelief. Elias looked at him quietly and spoke with calm certainty. "Because the system does not only recognize passwords." Mercer's eyes narrowed. "Then what does it recognize?" Elias glanced briefly toward the doorway where Victoria Ashford stood watching. Then he answered, "Integrity." Daniel Mercer stared at the frozen console screen as if the machine itself had betrayed him. The message "access denied" remained bright and unmistakable in the center of the monitor. The humming server racks around the room continued their steady rhythm, unaffected by the failed command that had just ended Mercer's plan. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he slowly stepped back from the keyboard. Victoria Ashford walked farther into the server room now, her presence calm but unmistakably firm. She looked from the system display to Mercer, and the disappointment in her expression carried more weight than anger. "You had access to everything you needed here," she said quietly. Mercer gave a short breath that might have been a laugh. "Access is not the same as control." Elias Brooks remained beside the console, his hands resting lightly near the keyboard where he had just restored the network security core. The system monitors around the room now displayed stable signals again. Every camera, every gate sensor, every security layer across the Ashford estate had returned to its original encrypted state. Mercer shook his head slowly, as if still trying to understand what had happened. "You had something in the architecture," he said. Elias answered calmly. "I built it the way systems should be built." Mercer looked at him again, frustration replacing the earlier confidence in his voice. "No firewall can recognize integrity." Elias nodded once. "You are right." He tapped a single key on the console. A new diagnostic screen appeared showing the deeper security framework that Mercer had been trying to override. Victoria studied the display carefully. Mercer's eyes followed the data fields as well. For the first time, he saw the final safeguard that had stopped his command from executing. The system required 2 levels of authentication. The first was the technical credential layer Mercer had been trying to rewrite. The second was something entirely different: behavioral authorization. The system monitored the way commands were entered and compared them to the original development patterns that had been recorded when the network was first built. Mercer frowned as the realization slowly reached him. "The system recognizes how you work," he said quietly. Elias nodded. "It recognizes the intent behind the commands." Mercer stared at the screen for another moment before finally stepping away from the console completely. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside as 2 estate security officers arrived at the doorway, alerted earlier by Victoria's silent message. They moved into the room calmly and positioned themselves beside Mercer. Victoria spoke with the same steady voice she used in business negotiations around the world. "Daniel Mercer," she said, "you will leave this property with them." Mercer did not resist. As the officers escorted him toward the exit, he glanced once more at Elias. There was no anger in his expression now, only a reluctant understanding. When the door closed behind them, the server room returned to its quiet mechanical hum. Victoria Ashford turned toward Elias slowly. "You protected this house again," she said. Elias shook his head slightly. "The system protected itself." Victoria looked toward the ceiling for a moment, as if considering everything that had happened that morning. Then she allowed a small smile to appear. Even so, I'm glad you were the one who built it. Minutes later, they returned to the main entrance hall, where Oliver Ashford still stood in front of the security monitors. The boy looked up the moment Elias entered the room. The cameras are calm again, Oliver said softly. Elias nodded. Everything is working the way it should. Oliver studied the screens for a moment longer before looking back at him. You fixed it. Elias looked at the glowing system map, where every network node now appeared stable and bright. Then he answered with the same quiet certainty he had carried since arriving at the gate that morning. No, he said gently. It was never broken. Outside, the iron gates of the Ashford estate stood closed beneath the tall oak trees, guarding a house where technology had been built not only with intelligence, but with trust. And somewhere beyond those gates, a guard named Reinhold would remember the calm man he had tried to turn away that morning. The man who had walked in without anger, solved the problem no one else understood, and quietly reminded everyone that the person standing outside the gate is sometimes the one who built the gate in the first place.